having a few eggs every day is no problem. You know, the whole thing about cholesterol in eggs was debunked, and the US Dietary Guidelines even, which is a very often conservative group, has said that it's not a nutrient concern. Basically, in 2017, there was a study that reported that dietary choline increased the risk of stroke, heart attacks, heart disease, and it did so by increasing a metabolite from gut bacteria called TMAO. And TMAO is, I'll spare you the big complicated medical name, but essentially, you know, the suggestion was that when you increase choline, which is a really important nutrient, it's important for brain function, for heart health, for so many different things, that it actually increases TMAO. But the devil is in the details of this study, and it's a big difference saying that dietary choline, which is found in eggs, and supplementary choline, which is in supplements, is the same thing. They're not. And there's also more complicated features, which is what's going on with your gut bacteria, which I think is the real take home here. And I'm going to kind of give a lead in on that in a minute. But basically, there was a study that showed, which was super small, by the way, 18 people that gave healthy middle-aged adults 450 milligrams of choline supplements every day for 2 months. Now, what they did was they found when they measured the TMAO in the blood, which is a blood test you can now get, that it increased almost tenfold, and that markers of blood clots and platelet stickiness, which causes blood clots, also increased. And so based on this study of supplemental choline, they somehow drew the conclusion that dietary choline, meaning what you get from your diet, like eggs or sardines, for example, are going to harm you. Now, is that true? Well, the catch is that dietary choline and supplemental choline may not be the same thing, and that they didn't really contextualize this whole thing. Now, there was another study that was in 2021, follow-up study at Cleveland Clinic, and the title was Dietary Choline Supplements, but not eggs, raise fasting TMAO levels in people with normal kidney function, a randomized controlled trial. So this is a really important follow-up study. And they basically prescribed choline supplements or eggs to people who are healthy, and found that choline supplements, but not eggs, were associated with increased TMAO and blood clotting. And the participants in the egg group ate 4 eggs a day, which nobody does, for 4 weeks, with no markers of blood clotting or increased risk of TMAO. So having a few eggs every day is no problem. And also for cholesterol, by the way. You know, the whole thing about cholesterol in eggs was debunked, and we know from, for example, now the US Dietary Guidelines even, which is a very often conservative group, has said that it's not a nutrient concern in our diet. That if you eat, you know, an egg with, let's say, 200 milligrams of cholesterol, it's not going to raise your blood cholesterol, and it's not going to impact your risk of heart attacks. Why? Because you have 5 liters of blood. Let's say you have 200 milligrams per deciliter of blood. That's 2,000 milligrams per liter. That's 5 liters. So that's 10,000 milligrams of cholesterol. And you throw a couple hundred milligrams in there, it doesn't really do much, right? So that's kind of another whole conversation. I've written a lot about that. Now, let's talk about choline. Because choline is really important. It's part of your brain cells. It's part of every cell membrane. Phosphatidylcholine is a part of your fatty acid profiles that makes up your cell membranes. It's important for communication. It's important for detoxification, for liver function, and super important. So dietary choline really is not associated with any increases in risk. Now, what is going on with supplemental choline? How does that work? You know, the problem is that dietary choline is super helpful, but when you take something in a pharmacologic dose or super high dose, you can kind of screw things up in terms of your biochemistry. So you have to be paying attention to that. But also, let's talk about TMAO a little bit more. TMAO essentially is a compound that is produced from gut metabolites. Now, we know that it's produced when you eat meat or when you have, you know, dietary choline, supplemental choline, or even if you eat fish. Now, we know from all the studies on fish consumption that fish is healthy, that it's associated with lower risk of heart attack, lower risk of stroke, that has more omega-3 fats. So there's a lot of benefits to it. And yet fish also dramatically increases TMAO, which contradicts the sort of overall science around this. But the truth is that eating foods is part of the story, but it's what's going on in your gut microbiome that is the other big part of the story. The microbiome is such an important part of our overall health. And if you have a bad microbiome, you're going to produce more toxic metabolites. So the key is not necessarily not eating things like fish or meat or eggs, which can increase TMAO, but actually changing your microbiome to a healthier microbiome so you don't produce as much TMAO. And that can be done through the typical ways we do this, through eating a high fiber diet, through probiotic and prebiotic foods, through polyphenols, all the things we talked about. So basically, TMAO is more reflective of gut health and gut bacteria than what you're doing. So for example, if you have a high fat, high sugar meal that's typically eaten in America, processed fat, it increases TMAO. And so, really you want to get rid of all that crap in your diet. You want to have a healthy microbiome, and you want to understand that choline and phosphatidylcholine are essential parts of our biochemistry and our health and our brain function and our liver detoxification. And if you don't have it, it could potentially be a problem. So, it's a really complicated thing. There's a lot of written about this. I've written a little bit about this as well. So I think we kind of have to not get all bunged up on this. And I think we should be aware that it's really important that dietary choline, which is in eggs and liver and meat, fish, as I mentioned, is basically converted into TMAO in the liver because of bad bacteria. So we need to get rid of the bad bacteria in our gut. We need to eat a healthy diet. And basically, I think, I'm not so worried about it. So I don't think choline-rich foods will increase your risk of any issue around heart disease. You can measure TMAO in your blood if you want. But I think the story around TMAO is a little more complicated. And I hope, you've kind of come away with understanding that basically fix your gut bacteria, don't worry about dietary choline, and you need it, and eat sardines and eat eggs. It's the basic bottom line. If you love that last video, you're going to love the next one. Check it out here. These are not really safe drugs in the long term. They cause a lot of secondary downstream effects, and they're not side effects, they're just effects we don't like. They're pretty consistent. So what would we do if we can't take these drugs? We have to look at the root causes. So